Hi there, I'm James Blacker, integral philosopher, life coach, and the founder and author of Kissing Consciousness. And this is a radio interview that I did about a year ago with Buck's Breakfast Radio. And it covers the topics of personal healing and reclaiming all of your true self and letting your brightest light shine. So I'm just going to go through it now and add in a couple of places where, in addition to the radio recording, I can put some Kissing Consciousness tables up, some charts to explain some of the things that I'll be talking about in the interview. And also I'd like to offer you something to help with that, which is first 2 chapters for free of the Kissing Consciousness Handbook, which is this here. Chapters 1 and 2 will help you understand the flow versus stuckness, and also the power of love, and really get into what Kissing Consciousness is all about. So if you'd like that, just click on the link in the descriptions below at kissingconsciousness.com/chapters.
You're listening to Buck's Breakfast. That was Goldfrapp and Ooh La La. Now, my next guest, James Blacker, is a life coach and a healer of trauma. And after the 12 months we've had as a nation or as a global community, I'm sure we all need a little bit of healing, whether it's our mental health, whether it's our direction in life, our career choices, our choices in love, or what we do with ourselves in our spare time. There's just so much to talk about here. But let's introduce James first of all. Good morning, sir.
Hi, Pippa. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all. Thank you very much for joining me. You've written a book called Kissing Consciousness, and it's about the 2 states of being which all humans alternate between. Can you expand on that? Just explain what you mean by that.
Yes, certainly. So if we think of our life starting from birth, I mean, when we're born, we don't actually have any a particularly well-developed mind at all, but after a certain age of around 2 years old, we do have a mind that we kind of have associated as our own. But it has no sense of limitation to it. Limitation is something that comes afterwards, and often comes through various experiences that we have where parts of ourselves are considered unacceptable to those around us, and so we learn that it's not safe to show them. And so this is where we get these 2 states of being. A person who's brought up with a lot of unconditional love will probably become an adult with lots of confidence, quite naturally, without any effort. But those who've had various challenges, or being told they're useless, or they've had trauma or anything like that, they're going to find that quite difficult. So they develop this second state of being that we're talking about. So you've got, on the one hand, self-acceptance, and on the other, something that's somewhere between self-judgment and self-constriction. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, that's how that develops through various experiences. And so what we want to do is get rid of the self-constriction and help people get back to self-acceptance.
Okay, so self-constriction then is would you describe that as a self-defense mechanism? Are we trying to protect ourselves from going through that hurt, that pain again that we suffered earlier in our lives? Is that it?
Absolutely. What's happened is we've learned that whatever that part of our personality is, or our interest, we've learned that it's not safe to show that. Somebody has chastised us for it, or it could be, in more stronger terms, they've given us the message that it's not acceptable to show that. And so, yes, as part of our survival mechanism, a deeper part of us that we perhaps didn't understand at the time puts it in a kind of a box for us, so that we forget about it, and it becomes what's known as the unconscious. And so, yes, shut away for safety reasons.
Okay. And actually the conscious or unconscious bit is the key, isn't it? Because we don't realise why we're exhibiting these behaviours, and why we, sometimes bring upon these things onto ourselves which stop us from moving forward.
Yeah, that's right. There's a difference between the subconscious and the unconscious. And we're all familiar with the subconscious as that thing that regulates sort of our body for us without us thinking about it. Or when we've driven down a country lane for 5 miles and we've realised we weren't paying attention, something else was driving. That's the subconscious. But the unconscious is a different thing. It's the unacceptable bits. And as you say, that kind of creates what's kind of like an invisible force field that stops us being true to ourselves in those specific areas. let's just get that up on the screen there as a kissing consciousness binary table. So you can see on the left-hand side, you have the love consciousness column, and on the right-hand side, the fear consciousness column. So these relate to the qualities of self-acceptance under love consciousness, self-allowance, and the qualities of self-constriction and self-judgment under fear consciousness. So the essence of kissing consciousness is to, rather than have some of our life be in the state of love consciousness and some in the state of fear consciousness, is to process and release all the blocks and the conditioning that cause the fear consciousness and move those states over so that we're pretty much always in the love consciousness state there.
And can it be fixed, James? This is the key.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's the point of my work, is that essentially to fix it, what you're doing is you're reversing the process of what happened in the first place. So when these, let's say you have a mini trauma event that you find that some aspect is unacceptable, what happens is there becomes a change in the psychology that you kind of forget that part of your personality or you bury it. But science has also shown that that effect happens in the nervous system as well, in the physiology of the body.
Okay.
So two places that it happens. And so in order to reverse that, essentially what we're doing is we're reversing those two experiences, those two actions in the body. So they were put into the unconscious, and we need to use our conscious awareness to bring them back out again. And that's all assuming that it's safe. So let's say you were, the person that was constricting you has now moved on, you've got a new home, that you're now an adult and what have you, then perhaps it's safe to start looking at things to actually reclaim them.
And I guess that could be quite a painful process. So how do you guide and help people through that?
Well, the first thing is that everything seems to come down to emotional intelligence and emotional freedom to be able to handle whatever happens. So the first thing would be to teach people that whether we call them emotions or feelings, they're either happening in the body or in the mind. So if we are unconditional with the body, we allow it to deal with emotions or feelings however it wants to, whether that's screaming, crying, or going for a run or whatever. Then if we also don't judge ourselves for what might happen to pass through our thoughts, then we allow a kind of freedom in both mind and body. And so excuse me, we don't have any resistance necessarily to what's occurring in our emotions and our feelings. So it's not necessarily the emotions or the feelings that are the problem, but most of people's difficulties is the resistance that they have to those emotions and feelings, which creates a kind of a tension. But actually, if they can flow with them, then there's a sort of different experience to actually touching base with them.
Yeah,
we can get a binary table up for that as well. So alongside the fact that every aspect of our life is subject to either love consciousness or fear consciousness, there are the parts that we're either in allowance of ourselves around or not in allowance of ourselves. Dealing with emotions itself is one of those aspects. So specifically with emotions, we can see a binary table, here we go, that explains where we are on that chart. So we all have a natural ability to handle our emotions, except some of us have had that shut down and denied to us. The most obvious way is you have people around you when you start crying say, oh, don't cry, or something like that effect, because they're uncomfortable with your emotions. So you might be taught that you have to pretend that you can't handle emotions because it upsets other people around you. But actually, in reality, if they let you express that and just be with them, then your first nature, as everybody's first nature would be, is that you can handle emotions. We're naturally designed to have emotions and feelings arise, pass through us, and then dissipate, and we get on with the next thing. So we see that in the binary table there as well.
It's interesting that you talk about the physical body, because I think, we're all aware that we have constricting thoughts and so on around different scenarios and situations, but to understand the physicality of it, talk us through that.
Yeah, okay. So what we call this is unlocking the moment, or unlocking the consciousness, because you're getting back from what what kissing consciousness calls a no permission to a yes permission. Now the trouble if you only do that intellectually is you only half unlock the permission. So you kind of have an intellectual sense that you ought to, in theory, be able to allow yourself to achieve or pursue whatever it is, or step into that. But the physiology doesn't support that. So as much as people talk about having a millionaire mindset or a mindset for a great relationship, that's only half of what you need. You also need the physiology to go with that. And you can imagine somebody who has an intellectual understanding of their freedom to ask somebody out on a date, but if they don't have the physiology to go with that, they're stumbling their words, they're coming across whatever, they start sweating the moment they start talking and all that kind of thing. So you do need the physiology to actually complete the unlocking and regain all of what was lost before.
Yeah. You work as a coach, James, so you're working one-to-one with your clients, and obviously all of that work is confidential and needs to be anonymous. But can you give us an example of somebody that you've worked with or a situation that you have managed to unlock and resolve?
Yeah, tricky. I mean, pretty much across the board. I mean, as you say, it's tricky with the confidentiality thing. The big three things that people have issues around are money, relationships, and their body. So over the time, whether one-to-ones or in group sessions, I've worked with people who've released blocks to all of those. Mm-hmm. So in relationships, the big thing is often, let's say the man goes into fear around the relationship, he goes into attachment. Attachment to the relationship, attachment to the woman, and develops a fear of loss. And so that fear of loss becomes a kind of a vicious cycle that then becomes needy and unattractive and all that kind of stuff. And then makes it more likely that the woman would become disinterested. Yeah. So that's one example there that you have to reverse that paradox and get people into a state where they're operating from their confidence and their fearlessness.
Yeah.
And then with health, because of these things, because they do exist in the physical body as well, that can be, depending on what the health issue is, but if it's caused by these self-constrictions, then that can unwind the body. That can, so if you imagine a constricted psychology and the constricted body that goes with it, that's not necessarily an enjoyable thing for the body. It's tight, it closed down, hunched shoulders, all that kind of thing. So actually, if you invite the release there, the body can straighten up, relax, release, breathe a bit more, and all those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds wonderful. I mean, what percentage of the population do you think would benefit if you could sign everybody up for a one-to-one session with you? What percentage of the UK do you think that you could help?
I don't know, 98%,
yeah.
95%, maybe something like that. It's interesting. I've got a note to say a story. I was in a short seminar a couple of years ago, somebody else's, as part of a business day. Somebody did an hour-long session, and this lady asked a room of 20 people how many of the people in the room considered that they had well-being, and nobody else did. Literally nobody.
Wow.
And this actually was a room of reasonably high achievers. So there were ex-headmasters, council workers, and most of the rest of the people were those who ran their own business. So that's quite astonishing, and that was pre-COVID. So I think we have a sort of superficial physical view of the world and society functioning and such like, but actually underneath it's quite, that there's a lack of well-being that's quite dysfunctional and problematic.
Is it a British thing, James?
No, it's not. No, if you think back into history, you think of the centuries that we've had. We have Victorian era, then we had the war era, and so there's a lot of trauma there. And so humanity has never really got yet to a point where people are being brought up in a state of unconditional love and allowed to express all of their aspects of themselves without judgment. So we're kind of, we might get to a point over the next 40 years or something like that where that comes in a bit more, but no, it's certainly not just a British thing.
Is that the seat of everything then, being brought up with unconditional love?
Yeah, pretty much. Because I mean, the old cliche is whether you're brought up with money or not. But actually, because we see money, people who are brought up with money who are successful, and people who are brought up with money who are a mess, and we see people who are brought up in poverty who are successful, and we see people who are brought up in poverty who are a mess. Then that's not necessarily the most important factor. But actually, if we're allowed to be ourselves in every way, then that's a great freedom to give a child growing up.
Yeah.
And the opposite of that is like essentially what we're talking about is what Carl Jung called shadow baggage, where you have to deny parts of yourself. So if you have a lot of that, it's been kind of said to be like trying to climb a ladder when you've got a broken arm.
Yeah, yeah. James, tell us about the book. Is it out now?
Yeah, the book's been out since last September. It's called Kissing Consciousness, Inviting in a World Beyond Self-Judgment, as available from about 6,000 stores worldwide, online in Kindle and paperback format.
Okay, and obviously we're not going to have you on the other end of a Zoom or sitting across us from us in a room. So is this a step-by-step guide to unlocking the things that are constricting us? How's the book formatted?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, I did a Stockholm seminar back in Sweden a few years ago, and I realised that after a good event, the energy just goes away, just naturally, because it does. People go home. So I needed a book. And also I'll be doing facilitated training so that there's people can carry on this stuff even when I'm not here. Now the book goes through the power of love and explains what that is. Then it explains these two states that we've been talking about, love consciousness and fear consciousness, i.e. self-acceptance and self-constriction. Then in the next chapter it goes into the tools and how you get rid of that. And then finally the last three chapters applying that to the three things I talked about: money and body and relationships.
Fascinating. James, it's been a delight to chat to you this morning. I first interviewed James 8 years ago, back in another life, so it's great to see you looking so healthy and being successful. Thank you for talking to us this morning. It's a fascinating topic, one we could talk about for, well, all day actually, but the book is out now. It's called Kissing Consciousness, and you'll find James Blacker on social media and on LinkedIn and various other platforms. Do you have your own website, James?
Yeah, kissingconsciousness.com. Yeah, it comes up on Google.
Lovely.
It's like a strange name, so it's all there.
Okay, kissingconsciousness.com. James, thanks very much for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Pippa. Nice to speak to you again.
Monday to Friday from 7 till 10, it's your Bugs Breakfast.